A man would return to his home when suddenly a man pops out of a closet and attacks him with a hammer. And what was in that house was a nightmare. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Judith Smith and her two daughters, Kristy and Wendy Cox. Viewer discretion is advised. This case occurred in Las Vegas, Nevada. The 80s and the 90s saw Las Vegas get a lot of new residences, in particular from like the older community who would kind of flock there for the nicer climates. And one of those individuals who would end up relocating to Las Vegas was a man, 65-year-old guy named Frank Allen. Frank was originally from Los Angeles. He was a very successful businessman. And so he purchased this big, like lavish home in Las Vegas, but he was not going to be living there permanently. So what he would do is he would rent out the home to, anyone who could afford it. And then he had a bedroom for himself so that he could return to the house at any point and, just visit Las Vegas and do business out there. And this would bring in a 50-year-old man named Joe Weldon Smith. And Joe brought along his wife, Judith Smith, and Judith's two daughters from a previous marriage, 12-year-old Kristy and 20-year-old Wendy. And I believe Judith had other daughters as well who were older and were not living there with them. By all accounts, Joe and Judith Smith had a very good marriage. There wasn't really anything that stuck out to anyone that seemed like something was going on. Joe was apparently very good with her daughters. He kind of turned into, a second father for them. Judith was a very sweet woman. She was very kind. And above all else, she was a very, very loving mother. And her kids meant everything to her. And certainly, she would not expect what would happen to her to happen. It was October 6, 1990. Frank Allen had been out of town, and he had come back to Las Vegas that evening. He had already spoken to Joe Smith, said, hey, I'm going to be coming back to the house pretty late. And Joe Smith had told him on the phone, well, that's actually okay because me and Judith and the two girls were actually out of town ourselves. So no one will be there when you get there. So Frank Allen gets to his home. He unlocks the door. He walks inside and he locks the two locks on the door, and he has to do so with a key. And when he enters, everything is completely quiet. There's no sign of anything that had gone wrong. And when he walked into the house, he assumed he was alone. Little did he know he wasn't. So Frank goes to the wet bar they have in the house, and he sees a note that was left by Joe Smith. The note said, quote, Frank, look in the locked room upstairs for your package. The key is on the wet bar. Joe. I guess a package had arrived for Frank, and so he put it in a bedroom. So he goes to his bedroom. He begins to kind of take off his clothes and get ready to just sort of unwind for the night. And he sits on his bed and he thinks to himself, something feels off. Something doesn't sit right with him right now in this situation. He just has a sense that something is amiss in the house. And boy, was he right. So Frank gets up and he begins to walk down a hallway. And there is like a game room, I guess, and next to that game room is a closet. And as he walks past the closet, suddenly a man comes out of the shadows wielding a hammer and strikes him over the head with it. Frank turns around, and to his surprise, the man holding the hammer is Joe Smith. Frank gets into an immediate struggle, like he's like fighting him off, trying to push his arms up and away, while Joe is still trying to smack him with the hammer. And Frank's like, Joe, what the hell are you doing? Like, it's me, it's Frank. And Joe doesn't stop. He continues to try to attack him. So Frank finally manages to free himself and get away. He runs down the stairs. He realizes that he had just locked the front door with a key, and he wouldn't have enough time to unlock the door. So he's going to cut through the kitchen to get out a back door. But as he's doing that, he sees Joe circle around to the other side. And so Joe, he could tell, was planning to meet him in the kitchen to continue attacking him. Frank said, I got to get out that door. But unfortunately, it's going to take me too much time to unlock it with the keys because he'll get me. And so what he does is he runs headfirst directly through the glass front door. He breaks through it, he gets into his car, and he takes off. And as he's doing so, as he's pulling out of the driveway, he sees Joe Smith standing in the front doorway, just sort of calmly, in a very menacing manner, and just kind of staring daggers at Frank. Frank drives up to the guardhouse of this property and tells the guard, "Call the police, there's someone in my house and he attacked me." 10 minutes later, the authorities arrive at the house. They are expecting to find Joe Smith in there, and they're sort of cautiously walking in because they don't know what else Joe may have. They don't know if he has a gun or anything like that. Meanwhile, Frank is kind of outside the home. He's covered in blood because he had been struck with a hammer. And the police are continuing to go through the house, and they get into one of the rooms and they see on the floor this like sleeping bag or a big comforter of some kind. And they assumed that that was Joe Smith trying to hide. That certainly was not what that was. They moved the sleeping bag or blanket, and underneath it was a dead body. It was one of the two daughters. They then go to another bedroom and they find a very similar situation. Underneath a sheet, they find a second body. And then they go into the master bedroom where Judith and Joe would sleep, and they found Judith. She was also deceased in bed. Judith, Wendy, and Kristy had all been murdered. There was a combination of being strangled and being bludgeoned to death over the head. Each victim had numerous blunt force trauma injuries to their bodies. This was a very brutal and very long attack. The coroner determined that they had been dead for about 18 hours. But Joe Smith is nowhere to be found in the house or anywhere on the property. He had already fled. A couple of hours after the body is discovered at approximately 4:30 in the morning, Joe Smith calls Judith's daughter-in-law. He told her on the phone that Judith, Wendy, and Kristy had all been murdered. He said, "I didn't do it, but I do know who did it." He actually tells her, "I killed one of the people that committed the murders, but the other one got away." He actually tried to blame Frank Allen and said that Frank Allen was one of the perpetrators of this triple homicide. Police knew that wasn't the case because Frank had flown in or come in from Los Angeles, and they could confirm that there was no way he was in town in Vegas when the murders actually happened. They know he didn't do it. But Joe was told, the daughter-in-law, it was Frank. He was mad because I couldn't pay him the money he needed. And then he tells her on the phone, "I'm either going to go end my own life, or I'm going to track down the other people responsible and I'm going to kill them myself." Police searched the home and they found a few letters, and one of them was in a briefcase. And the letter read, quote, "A triple murder was committed here this morning. My wife, Judith Smith, and my two stepdaughters, Wendy Cox and Kristy Cox, were assassinated. I know who did it. I know who sent them. I had been warned that this would happen if I did not pay a large sum of money to certain people. I have been owing it for a long time and simply could not come up with it. And I didn't believe the threat. I don't need any help from the police in this matter. I will take care of it myself. They will have to kill me too. When and if you find me, I'm sure I will be dead, but that's okay. I already killed one of the murderers, and I'm going to get the others and the man who I know sent them. There were 3 in all. You will probably find my body within a day or two. Thank you, Joe Smith. P.S. I thought I had gotten away when we moved here, but it didn't work. When we moved, we were being watched. If I am successful in my task at hand, I will turn myself into the police." End quote. Police, at that point, when they found out that Joe had called the daughter-in-law and they had read this letter, they were convinced that Joe Smith was actually the perpetrator of these horrific crimes. I mean, everything points to him. He attacked Frank Allen. He was literally hiding in the house and he attacked Frank. And you could say maybe he thought it was one of the killers who was still in the house and he was just hiding from them, was going to attack them. But it got to a point where he knew it was Frank Allen and he continued to attack him and he continued to chase him. So police and Frank believe that Frank was supposed to also be killed that night, possibly to use Frank as some sort of scapegoat as to have been the one to commit these murders, and maybe Joe would have been like, "Oh, I'm the hero, I killed him after he killed my family." But that plan failed because Frank got away. They know that Joe fled in his 1988 gold 2-door Lincoln Continental, and it had a Vanity, Nevada license plate. and the license plate had Smitty 2. He was charged with 3 counts of murder and 1 charge of attempted murder. But obviously they still needed to arrest him. They just needed to find him. And the other thing that they were having a hard time with was what the hell was the motive? Because they discovered that there was no extramarital affairs. Neither spouse had been cheating on the other. There was no like custody battles interfering. And as a matter of fact, in a rare situation, Joe did not have a life insurance policy on Judith. There was no financial benefit for him to kill her. So they had no clue what the motive was, why he would do this to his wife and 2 stepdaughters, and so brutally as well. So eventually this story airs on Unsolved Mysteries, and within minutes, literally minutes of the episode airing, they get numerous phone calls. The tips, several of them said that Joe Smith is living in Watts, California, which was near LA. He had been hiding out in a motel, but I guess at one point he got into contact or connection with his brother. So police went out there and they began to tail Joe's brother to see if there was ever any kind of interaction that Joe ever made an appearance. And eventually, after several days, they found Joe Smith through this method. They had followed him back to a motel room where they basically calmly arrested him. He did not put up a fight. They put cuffs on him and they said, you are charged with 3 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. Inside the motel room, they found a new social security card and another ID that it was very evident that Joe Smith had been trying to change his name, change his identity. He had been missing for about 6 months, so they don't know if he had used other names in that 6-month period or what. He told police that he had actually seen the episode of Unsolved Mysteries himself, and he said, I had been expecting someone to come knocking at my door any minute. And he told them, I'm glad it's all over at this point. But he told them that I had to go on the run in order to prove my innocence. In November of 1992, Joe Smith goes on trial for the murders, and he tries to bring up this kind of bizarre situation, bizarre story. So Joe Smith takes the stand and he says that in 1986, he fell into some very hard financial times. And at that time in 1986, he agreed to work for a drug cartel, or he was given the option to do a drug dealing opportunity in Los Angeles. Later that same year, he and his wife Judith and the 2 girls would move to Las Vegas, but continued to work for this crime organization. He says at some point, Joe Smith was falsely accused of stealing or not paying back money to this organization, and that they had threatened him if he did not pay back what he owed. By 1989, Joe Smith leaves this alleged organization. But then a henchman from this group found Joe Smith and reminded him of this massive debt he owes, and reminded him of the or else part of it. Like, if you don't pay it back, we're going to kill you and your family. So then he begins to work for the organization again, now in Las Vegas. So that's when he ends up finding the house that Frank Allen was renting out. Joe Smith would claim that he paid Frank Allen in cocaine, but also in money as well. He would then say that in early October of 1990, just before all this happened, he had sold 20 kilograms of cocaine, but he decided to keep all of the money for himself because the organization was paying him peanuts. He then claims that between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. on the morning of the murders, someone woke him up by tapping on his toe. He saw 3 men standing over his bed, and one of them, he said, had a hammer in their hand, and he was hitting the hammer against the palm of his hand like, well, we got you, kind of thing. And one of the thugs said to him, this is what Joe Smith is saying. One of these guys said, "Where's our stuff? You have it, where is it?" And then he says he discovered afterwards that his family had already been killed by these 3 men. On the stand, they questioned him, well, why did you attack Frank Allen? And he said, I thought he was one of the 3 guys. I was hiding from them. I thought it was one of them. But then they said, okay, but you clearly knew after literally a second that it wasn't one of them, that it was Frank Allen, but you continued to attack him. And you chased him around the house with the intent, because he said you're swinging a hammer at him. You did hit him with the hammer at one point. So what's that about? Why did you not stop? And really all he came back with was, it was dark. I didn't really get a good look. Which they know wasn't true because all the lights in the house were on when this occurred. They don't really have a true motive for Joe Smith as to why he did this. But they do know that based on physical evidence they collected in terms of like blood evidence, the hammer, all of that, they have Frank Allen's testimony. There was literally no evidence in that house that anybody else was in there. No fingerprints from unknown sources, no blood from unknown sources, nothing. Everything pointed to Joe Smith killing his wife and his 2 stepdaughters for reasons not completely known. So the jury got all the evidence, they got all the testimony, and everything they agreed pointed to Joe Smith. And so they found him guilty of all 3 counts of murder. For one of them, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole for 2 of the murders. For the murder of Wendy, I'm not sure what the exact reasoning was, but for the murder of Wendy, he was sentenced to death. And then he also got an additional 20 years for the attempted murder of Frank Allen. Now, as far as I could tell, Joe Smith has not been executed. He is still on death row. There was a point where he sued, along with another death row inmate, the state for, I guess, for how they were going to use the chemicals in the lethal injection process, because I guess the state of Nevada was going to be using a new, different cocktail that wasn't the norm. It doesn't sound like he won whatever lawsuit he may have filed, but it doesn't, I mean, he's still sentenced to death. There was, I guess, at one point he took it to the appeals court, the Supreme Court of Nevada, and they agreed with the death sentence ruling, and he is still there. He's just still waiting to be executed. It is wild that, the trial happened in the mid-90s, and here we are 30 plus years later, and he's still on death row. It's wild that takes that long. But in the end, Judith, Wendy, and Kristy got the justice they very rightfully deserved. But that is it for this case. True crime, a Rooney Dooney Dingleberry Donge. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, hi if you're new here. My name is Mike. I tell true crime stories here on YouTube, obviously. So please subscribe and give this video a like. Hit the bell so you're reminded of when I post videos. And I also tell short form true crime stories over on TikTok. The link to that TikTok page is in the bio or in the description of this video below. And it's in the link tree, so you can easily click it in there. I don't know if TikTok will still be around for us in the United States in 20 plus days or so. It could be, or maybe it won't be. I don't know. But in the meantime, feel free to follow that page if you like. I tell, much shorter form true crime over there. But I do post compilation videos from TikTok over here every month. I do also have a second page where I tell like movie reviews, TV show stuff, like entertainment type page, just for fun. So that's also linked below in the link tree in the description. And then if there's a case you want me to cover, just send me a really quick email. My email is listed below. All I need to know is the name of the case, where it happened, and when it happened. I'll add that to my list. The list is 6,700 plus names long. I pick the cases I cover each time at random, to be fair, because most of my cases that I got are from you guys. But you can actually see the case list in the link tree as well. You can scroll through it. It's alphabetical. If you see the name on there already, you don't need to email me. If it's crossed out, it means I've already covered that case, either here on YouTube or on TikTok. But if it's not crossed out, I'm still awaiting to cover that case. So just be patient if you recommend a case. But that is it for this video, True Crime Rooney. So we will see you for the next case. And until then, ta-ta for now.